Hello and welcome to the Insta360 studio, where today we'll be using keyframes to get the exact shot we are looking for. We'll do some subject tracking and we'll cover some additional tips to help you get the best results when reframing your 360 videos. One of the great things about using a 360 camera is the fact that you are capturing everything in all directions all the time, and later on you can decide exactly how you want to reframe your video. Well, if you are new or perhaps considering getting into 360 cameras, perhaps you're wondering what that workflow looks like. Well, that's what we're going to be covering in today's video using the Insta360 Studio desktop app. And even if you are already familiar with the Insta360 Studio, hopefully I can also provide some additional information and tips that you might find useful. Now, this tutorial type video is a bit of a change for me, so I would like to get your feedback in terms of if you find this useful, would you like to see more content like this, and if so, what topics would you like to see covered? But for now, there's a lot to cover, so as usual, I'll place the chapters up here and on the video timeline, but first, this. Before we continue with today's video, a quick disclaimer. This video is not sponsored, paid for, or influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money, and the opinions are entirely my own. Now, I do include links to the featured products as well as my recording equipment. These may appear throughout the video and in the video description. If you purchase using these links, I may make a commission, and this is what helps fund the channel, but rest assured there is no price disadvantage to you. You are getting the best price I can find. Alternatively, if you want to support the channel, you could follow this link and buy me a coffee. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. So back to the video. The Studio is a free download available at the Insta360.com website. Once at the site, just click on the downloads link at the top of the page, and here you will immediately find the Insta360 Studio. There are direct links for downloading the version you want, or if you click on the Studio title, that will take you to the product page where you can get additional information as well as the download links. The Studio is available for both Mac OS as well as Windows. Today we will be using the Mac OS version, but apart from a few differences in shortcut keys, the workflow is pretty much identical. So let's go ahead and launch the Insta360 app and load some files. Now, you can load the files and work with them while they are on the memory card, and you basically have two options for doing that. The first is to hook up the camera directly to the computer using its USB port. To do this, power on the camera, plug it in, and select the file transfer option. Although the camera must remain powered on, you can elect to charge it from your computer. One drawback of using this method is you will be limited to the USB transfer speed of the camera, which is around 80 megabytes per second. Alternatively, you could remove the card from the camera and place it in a high-speed card reader, and this will allow you to take full advantage of the read speed of the card. So regardless of whether you hook up the camera or insert the SD card, you will get a prompt in the Insta360 Studio where you can choose to import all of the files on the card or select which files you wish to import. Personally, I prefer to transfer the files off the memory card and onto the hard drive of my computer, and this will ensure the fastest processing time. Of course, you can select all the files to transfer, or you can select individual files, but when doing so, be sure to transfer not only your 360 video file, that's the INSV file, but also its corresponding low-resolution version, that's the LRV file, which is used in generating previews. Back in the Studio, if the files are stored locally, simply hit Open Files and navigate to the location. And at any time while working in the studio, if you wish to import additional files, you can hit the plus icon at the top left, or go to the File menu and choose Open Files. Before we start editing, let's take a quick tour of the Insta360 Studio. Starting on the left-hand side, you have what's called the Footage panel, where you can see all the currently loaded files. In the center, you can see the preview window, and down below it, you will see what's called the timeline, and this is where we'll do most of our editing. And on the right-hand side, you have what's called the Stitching panel, where you'll find some additional editing options, and we'll cover some of these later on. Going back to the Footage panel, here you can decide how you would like to organize your files and also display your files, whether you want a full preview, a simple thumbnail preview, or just the file details. You'll notice if you choose the full preview and move your mouse back and forth across the preview, you will get a preview playback. But note, this is only possible if you have that corresponding LRV file. In order to work with a file, simply double-click on it, it will load it into the preview window and immediately begin playback. If the file has previously been edited, it will be loaded together with its last saved editing data, which you can see down here in the timeline. Here you can see the file that I previously edited for my introduction. So let's load the original unedited version of this and do some editing. So with the file loaded, let's first look at how to control playback. At the bottom left, you will notice a play and pause button, and you can also toggle play and pause by hitting the spacebar. If I left click and hold on this bar, which is called the playhead, I can scrub backwards and forwards throughout the video to pick any particular point. For fine adjustments, I can use the left or right arrows to advance or go back one frame at a time, or in combination with the shift key 10 frames at a time. Either side of the play pause button, there are also buttons to jump to the beginning of the clip or the end of the clip. Turning our attention to the preview window, this is where the reframing magic happens. By left-clicking and holding anywhere in the preview window, I can drag the image around to select any angle from my 360-degree view. And using the scroll wheel on my mouse, I can zoom in and out to select any field of view. So let's start doing some reframing. Now, this is the file that I used to create the introduction for this video, although it looks quite different right now, but if you scroll around 180 degrees, there is yours truly. Now, if I were to just keep this angle and play the clip, as you'll see, it's not really quite what I'm looking for. So let's go back to the beginning of the clip and start doing some editing. Now, my first edit is going to be to trim the clip to get rid of the first few seconds where nothing much is happening. There are a couple of different ways I can do this. Firstly, I can grab the playhead, find the position where I want the clip to begin, I would say right there before he starts talking, and use this button to mark as trim start. Alternatively, you can grab the trim start marker on the timeline and move it to the desired start location. Before I do any keyframing, first I need to decide on the aspect ratio of my output video. Currently we are in 16:9 format. If you click on here, you can see there are various options, including a 1:1 ratio, a 9:16 ratio, and several other choices, but I'm going to choose a 16:9 ratio. So the next thing I want to do is decide on the initial framing for the start of my video. So using the mouse as we saw previously, I'm going to move the image around and zoom out to get the exact perspective that I want. And now I'm going to lock in those settings by creating what's called a keyframe, which I do by clicking the Add Keyframe button at the bottom right. And when I click on it, you'll notice that a yellow marker appears on the timeline, and it shows me an information box with all the saved settings for this view, including the angle of the x-axis, the y-axis, the rotation, the current field of view, and current distortion correction. Now, as long as I have this keyframe selected, I can change its settings, and I can do that either interactively by moving the image around as I did before, and you can see the numbers in the box updating, or I can change the number in the box itself, either by typing in a number, for example, if I want exactly 180 degrees, or with a bit of practice you can actually manage to use the mouse to scroll each parameter individually. When it comes to selecting the field of view, here too you can do it interactively, you can enter your own value, or you can also select one of the presets. And you'll see a good example of this in just a few moments. So once I finalize my initial keyframe, if I play the video, it will maintain exactly these view settings from this point forward. But of course this is not the view that I want when I raise the selfie stick, so we need to create another keyframe at that point of the video. So let's go back a little bit, and then slowly go forward to the point where I raise the selfie stick. And now let's reframe to get the view we want, maybe something like this. So let's now lock in this view with another keyframe. Now, instead of having to go down here and click the Add Keyframe button each time, there is an easier way. All I need to do is right-click in order to add a keyframe. But now we get an important lesson on how keyframes work. So currently I have just two keyframes, my starting view and my second keyframe with this view. And the way this works in the video is that it will gradually transition between the two views. So if we go back to the beginning and play it, you'll see that gradual transition, and of course this is not what we're looking for. What I need to do is to go back to the point right before I raise the selfie stick and add a new keyframe with the same view that I had at the start of the video. Now I could try to eyeball this, but there is a much easier way. If I go back to my starting keyframe and right-click, I can copy the keyframe, and then go to the part of the video where I want this keyframe and paste it in. So now if I replay the video, you'll see that the starting view remains the same right up to the point where I raise the selfie stick. Okay, so far so good, but let's go back to that last keyframe. Now what I'd like to do is make this a little bit more dramatic. So I'm going to edit this keyframe and select one of the preset views, in this case Tiny Planet. So let's go back to right before the transition and see what this looks like. Okay, looks pretty good, but now what I want to do is to transition back to a more normal view when I lower the selfie stick a few seconds later. So I'm going to return to that last keyframe and copy it, paste in the identical keyframe information a few seconds later, then advance to the part where I lower the selfie stick and choose the framing that I want to transition to. Let's go with this, and of course we lock that in again with another keyframe. So let's just review that last segment. Looking pretty good. Before we move on, some additional tips on working with keyframes. The first being that, just like with most editing steps, keyframes also support undo and redo. So if I'm keyframing this file, if I decide that this is not what I was looking for, I can head up to the Edit menu and choose Undo, or of course I can use the shortcut key Command-Z on a Mac or Control-Z with Windows. You'll notice that each time I press Command-Z, my last edit is undone and my keyframes disappear. If I want to redo, I can use Shift Command-Z, and now you can see they reappear. The second tip is that you can delete individual keyframes. So for example, if I no longer want this particular keyframe, I click on it, then right click, and you will notice in addition to copy, there is also the option to delete this keyframe. But do be advised that when deleting a keyframe, sometimes you get some pretty strange transitions as a result. The next tip, you can also move keyframes. So if you decide for a particular keyframe that you would like it to happen slightly earlier or slightly later, again you can mark the keyframe, click and hold, and you can now drag the keyframe to the preferred location. And the final tip in this section, you can change how the transition takes place between two keyframes. If I click on the timeline between these two keyframes, you'll notice that this yellow line appears, and I can select from different transition types. The default is just a smooth transition between one and the other, but you can also do slips and fades in different combinations, or you can have no transition at all. Now, I'm not going to go into these in depth here, but just try them out and see which ones work for you. So, up to this point, all of our reframing work has been done by using keyframes, which, if all you're looking to do is track a subject, can be pretty tedious and even pretty challenging if the subject is moving around a lot in the frame. And that is where our deep track function really makes life a lot simpler. Now, you will find the deep track function down here at the bottom right. But before we start that, just a couple of tips. First of all, if you are currently on a keyframe, you will not be able to start the deep track function. Also, if you are between keyframes, you can launch deep track, but I would not advise it because you are likely to end up with some pretty strange transitions. So I'm going to place the cursor a little bit after my last keyframe. And an important point here is that when I start tracking, it will use the field of view defined in the previous keyframe. Now, you can change this later on, and we'll cover that in just a few moments. So let's go ahead and start deep track. Now, when I click on it, the first thing you'll notice is that it places a target on any identified subjects in the picture. If you have multiple subjects, you will get multiple targets. And this can be a very easy way to track a subject. If I simply click on the target, it begins tracking. But this is not quite the view I'm looking for, so I'm going to stop that one here. Now, just as with other editing types, I can undo that. So if I hit Command-Z, that will remove that previous tracking. And once again, I'm going to enable deep track. But this time I'm not going to use that target, I'm going to define my own target, and the way I do that is by holding down the left mouse key and defining a box around my target, in this case my face. Having defined the box, I hit the Start Tracking button, and this is much more the framing I'm looking for. Now, this video is not particularly challenging when it comes to subject tracking, but you can use deep track to great effect in all kinds of challenging situations. For example, in this shot I had my X3 mounted to the top of my helmet, and I used deep tracking in order to track a skier behind me on the mountain. And of course you can have a lot of fun tracking your four-legged friends. So a few tips when working with the deep track function. The first you have already seen an example of. Just as we saw with keyframes, you can use the undo function to remove any tracking edits you have made, and of course you can use redo to restore those changes. Next tip, as we saw with keyframes, you can delete tracking segments. If I go to the timeline and click on this tracking segment, it will highlight it and show me a dialog box similar to what we saw with the keyframe. Now, unlike the keyframe, which were deleted with a right click, there is actually a delete icon directly in this box. Next up, even though you cannot move a tracking segment, you can shorten it. Once again, I'm going to click on the segment to mark it and highlight it, and you'll notice I can move the beginning point to a time later in the video, although I cannot move it any earlier in the video. And I can move the end point to a point earlier in the video, but not later. And one final point is something I mentioned a few moments ago, and that is you can edit the view of your tracking segment. Once again, if I click on the tracking segment to highlight it, you can see the parameters here, and I can alter the view either by dragging in the window, zooming in the window, or changing the parameters in the box. Now, a useful example for this is when using the deep track feature, typically it places the subject in the center of the frame, but perhaps I want the subject to be offset slightly to one side of the center. So I adjust my view settings, and now when I replay the segment, you can now see the results of that change. So now that our reframing is complete, my file is ready for export. Now there are a number of additional editing options available in the studio, including adjusting for the stabilization type, compensating for various accessories, and there is also basic video processing and audio processing, but these are beyond the scope of today's video, and these will be covered in more detail in future videos. For today, we're just going to export our final video. We're going to give it a name, define a path of where to locate it, define the bitrate, resolution, and other parameters for my video, and start the export. And if we take a look in the target location, here you can see my newly created file. And there we have it. So that's going to cover it for today. There is a lot more to cover in the Insta360 studio, but I thought this was a good stopping point. As I said at the beginning, if you would like to see further videos of this type, please let me know through the comments section, and also add some detail on the topics you would like to see covered. So that wraps it up for another video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. If you have any questions, any comments, if you want to share your experience or make suggestions for future videos, please drop those into the comments section. Otherwise, thanks again for watching.